Afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Daily Politics. The general election campaign is officially underway as Parliament's dissolved. The main parties are trading blows on tax and the NHS, but hanging over it all, of course, Brexit. The Brexit Secretary says Britain will not pay €100 billion to leave the EU after newspaper reports suggest it could be that high. But the EU's chief negotiator says the UK must settle its accounts, though he insists he's not out to punish Britain.
Labour promises to suspend planned closures to hospitals and other services in England. The Conservatives unveil a new poster attacking Labour on tax and spending. Yes, the campaign is well and truly up and running. But
before we get to the general election, the parties face a big electoral test tomorrow with local elections in England, Scotland and Wales. We'll be speaking to the main parties.
And Parliament's been dissolved. No, not literally. The building is still very much out there and open to the public. The Clerk of the House of Commons will join us to explain exactly what dissolution means.
So all that in the next hour. With us for the duration, Business Minister Margot James and the Shadow International Trade Secretary Barry Gardiner. Now, as of midnight last night, Parliament was dissolved, as Joko was saying, which means Margot and Barry no longer get to put MP after their names. They merely revert to being humble members of the public seeking re-election. But just because they don't have MP by their name doesn't mean they aren't still politicians. Brexit Secretary David Davis says the UK will not pay €100 billion to the EU as part of a so-called Brexit divorce bill. Mr Davis was responding to a report in the Financial Times. It says it's calculated that the gross upfront bill has now risen to €100 billion after new demands from France and Germany. Meanwhile, the EU's chief negotiator has said the UK must settle its accounts, but he didn't give a figure. Let's hear what they have to say this morning.
Some have created the illusion that Brexit would have no material impact on our lives, or that negotiations can be concluded quickly and painlessly. This is not the case. Once again, there is no punishment. There is no Brexit bill. The financial settlement is only about settling the accounts.
We will meet our international obligations. We haven't even started negotiation yet. We'll engage on that in the negotiating chamber. But this 50, 60, 100 billion numbers plucked out of the air are not ones we're going to be working with. This is a negotiation of equals. We're not going there as supplicants. It's not for them to say it's going to be done this way, going to be done that way. They have to obey the law, Article 50. Article 50 says these things should be considered together. That's what we're going to do.
So joining me now, Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform. It's a broadly pro-European think tank based in London, though it's not uncritical of the EU. What is the Commission up to, floating figures of 100 billion? It was 50, 60, now 100 billion. By this rate, by the end of the month, it could be $1 trillion.
Well, I'm not sure what they're up to. What they're up to, I think, is trying to shock the British out of what they see as their complacency, because there's some concern, not just in the Commission, but in France and Germany, who are pushing the Commission to take a tough line, that the British are a bit out of touch with reality. The reality is, if there's going to be a deal, Britain will pay a Brexit bill of some sort, and it'll have to agree to pay some of the figures, to pay something fairly soon before the EU moves on to talk about trade talks. That's the reality. And when they talk to people in London, they have the idea that the British don't get it.
But isn't it Brussels that's a bit out of touch if they think any British government would ever agree to anything approaching 100 billion?
Brussels hasn't asked for 100 billion. The FT says the gross figure that Brussels could ask for, absolute maximum, would be 100 billion.
Based on Commission briefings.
The FT, being a good newspaper, actually does its own calculations, has done some of its own calculations on this.
But it's based on the kind of assumptions the Commission would make, that we need to pay more for farm policy and so on. So the idea, I mean, in a sense, are they playing into Mrs May's hands? Because this is only going to strengthen her, is it not? The one person they will trust not to come anywhere near a figure like this is her. I mean, do they realise what they're doing in Brussels? Are they not the deluded ones?
Well, the way they see it is Britain's in a weak position. If there's no deal at all, which is quite possible, and it all could fall apart on money, if there's no deal at all, we leave the EU without an Article 50 settlement. think of the impact on the financial markets, think of the impact on the real economy, how businesses wouldn't know what law they operated under. They think that the British will blink. They may be wrong, maybe Mrs May won't blink. They think if Britain says we're not going to pay anything, we're going to leave without a deal, it'll be bad for the European economy, but they believe it'll be even worse for the British economy.
But they would then, if they believe their own figures, which is a big if, they then have a 100 billion hole in their accounts.
No, they don't. They have about a 17 billion euro hole in their accounts. What they're really concerned about is the next 2 years. After Britain leaves the budget, there's 2 years left in the current EU budget cycle. It's a bit less than 20 billion euros, and they want Britain to plug that. That's their most important.
But if that was the bottom line, then you're into negotiation. Then you're closer at something that the British government may well find acceptable to pay our obligations until the end of the current budget process, which goes beyond our leaving of the EU in return for a free trade deal. That's a negotiating
There is a
position.
circle that, if we're lucky, can be squared. The circle is this: if the British can claim that they are paying some money into the budget and getting a good trade agreement in return, they will pay something, much less than they're being asked for. They pay something on the lines you mentioned. The problem is that the EU's got itself into this procedural position whereby we're not going to talk about the future trade agreement until you give some of what we want on the rights of citizens and the budget. That's the difficulty. That's the circle that has to be squared. The talks will probably break down on this, but later they'll come together and hopefully get a deal.
Barry Gardiner, do you give any credence to this 100 billion figure?
I think Charles is absolutely right. I do think that there is a lot of positioning going on, but I think the 100 billion is made up of potential liabilities, and it's even understood within the Commission and certainly within the FT article that actually what is happening here is there could be returns to the UK. Now the question is, do you put that money up front because it's a liability and then get it back if it doesn't crystallise, if it doesn't materialise as a liability, or do you actually wait and see if it crystallises and then pay it at that time? But the key thing that I think both David Davis and Charles were right to stress is that we will pay our international obligations. We're a country that
Mr.
does
Davis,
that.
the Brexit secretary,
Indeed,
said
absolutely,
that.
I agree
But
with
would
him.
a Labour government consider paying anything like 100 billion?
Look, the point here is this. We want the best possible deal. The best possible deal is not simply about the 100 billion. The best possible deal is a total package in which we have the friction-free access into the internal market, that we have that access, that we continue to be able to do the maximum amount of trade with the European Union. And actually, upfront costs have to be offset against the eventual benefit and the returns to the UK exchequer that increased revenues would bring.
Margot James, it's clear we're going to have to pay something, and it will be in the billions now, isn't it?
Well, I think David Davis was clear that we weren't considering walking away paying nothing. We will pay something, but it's got to be consistent with what we actually end up owing and not some figure dreamt up at such an early stage of the negotiations. There's a long way to go. We're just at the beginning, and I think there's a lot of talk and various figures have been bandied about. We will pay what we will owe as part of a deal that the Prime Minister will bring back. That will be the best possible deal that we can get. I think we need to see that in the round.
Of course, there will be a lot of argument over what we owe. That's what the arguments will be about. And there's some people who think it would be simpler if we didn't even go down this road. Let's just listen to Paul Nuttall, the leader of UKIP, and hear what he had to say.
What we want to know in UKIP is how much is the government willing to pay? As far as UKIP is concerned, we should not be paying anything at all. We believe the Prime Minister must make it clear to the Eurocrats that she is prepared to walk away, because if she does not, they will walk all over her and Britain will get a rotten deal.
That was Paul Nuttall. Is she prepared to walk away?
Not on that basis, no, absolutely not. We're not a country that seeks to avoid our international obligations. There will be something due and we will pay it, but it will be based on what we actually owe, as I said earlier, and not on some figure dreamt up in the early stages of the discussions, before the negotiations have even started in Brussels.
Barry Gardiner?
Look, the point I think that rebuts Paul Nuttall is simply this. It's not about if they offer us a bad deal, we should walk away. And I think this is the point that Charles was getting at. Actually, walking away, going on to WTO rules, is the worst possible damage that there could be to our economy in the long term. We need a sustainable settlement. That must come as a package, and the difficulty, as Charles said, is this fact that the EU seems to have locked itself into a separate track negotiation rather than a combined one. We need to get that combined settlement back on track, but people need to understand that it's not simply about this figure of 100 billion, it's actually about what do we eventually have as our partnership, our trading future with the rest of the world, including the EU.
Charles Grant, the Barnier approach is to say you need to settle your accounts, he's saying to Britain, and that would involve coming to some amount. And then we can look at the free trade deal, or the kind of arrangement that Britain will have with Europe post-Brexit. But there's also the well-known Brussels principle that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So although he wants to do them as almost two separate negotiations, the fact is we could agree a sum of money with Mr. Barnier, but then not be happy with the deal that's on offer on trade post-Brexit and say, well, then that bit that we agreed to is off the table. I mean, that's the Brussels approach, isn't it?
Well, I think the way around that is clear, and it's what Barnier himself told me he wanted. This is that the British have to accept the principle of paying into the budget this autumn, accept some of the methodology, the way of calculating the exact figure, then not get to the exact figure, leave that on one side, move on with the trade talks. If the trade talks go well, then come back to the details of the exact figure of the budget talks, and as part of a final package, it'll all be agreed together. You're right, nothing's agreed to everything.
And when you put it like that, you can see the beginnings of the British government could agree to that.
I think that yes, on the sort of procedure and the timing, what the British government wants is not completely compatible with what the EU wants. If with goodwill on all sides, they can come together. The trouble is this brinkmanship now, and you're right what you said at the beginning, Andrew. This 100 billion figure plucked from thin air doesn't help. It'll reinforce those like Nuttall who want no deal at all and strengthen their hand. And it's very foolish of the Commission to do that. I can tell you the Council is not happy about this. I was in the Council and the Commission yesterday. Council doesn't like this brinkmanship from the Commission, but there's some brinkmanship on the British side too.
Very interesting. Charles Grant, thank you. I think we'll be seeing more of you.
On the campaign trail, Labour have today turned their attention to the NHS with a promise to suspend closures of hospital services, including A&E and maternity units across England. The plan would include reviewing all 44 local healthcare sustainability and transformation plans, or STPs, just falls off the tongue, which were due to deliver £22 billion worth of savings for the NHS. But NHS bosses and ministers have insisted the plans are not about saving money, but about delivering a more efficient service. Here's Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, John Ashworth, speaking earlier today.
When it comes to local services, we all know that things sometimes need to change. But if things are going to change, then the public need to be involved. And these STP plans, these Tory plans to downgrade services, whether it's at Dewsbury or whether it's at Darlington or whether it's in places like Ealing in London, have not had the public involved in them whatsoever. We cannot have a system where A&Es are downgraded, hospitals closed, maternity units downgraded or closed, and the public are shut out of the decisions and they have no say at all. So, I am announcing today that a Labour government, that on its first day, will stop this hospital closure programme and have a full review.
John Ashworth there. Well, meanwhile, the Conservatives have launched an attack on Labour with a new poster claiming the party's promises to date amount to a £45 billion tax bombshell, evoking memories of previous election campaigns dating back to John Major's campaign in 1992. Labour's dismissed the charge as nonsense and insisted all their pledges were fully costed and would be outlined in their manifesto. But Chancellor Philip Hammond and Brexit Secretary David Davis picked up the theme this morning. This is what Mr Hammond had to say.
Just when we need strong and stable leadership for our economy and our country over the crucial next 5 years as we negotiate our exit from the EU and chart a new course in the years beyond, Jeremy Corbyn offers a chaotic and high-risk gamble that would lead to higher taxes, more borrowing and more debt. It's a gamble for which we would all pay the price, and that choice must be uppermost in people's minds when they cast their votes on June the 8th.
Philip Hammond there. Barry Gardiner, let's just return to the issues on health and talk about these STPs, these plans that John Ashworth, your colleague, says is all about downgrading services and closing maternity units and A&E services across England. You're halting those plans. Does that mean you're also halting the attempt to make these £22 billion of efficiency savings that the government has called for?
Well, you're absolutely right to draw attention to the fact of what is driving this whole programme. Because it was actually the government said that they were cutting £30 billion, but they would give £8 billion, and that's how you got at the £22 billion supposedly efficiency savings.
So you want to hold those two?
What we're saying is that the way in which this has been done has failed to really properly account for the wishes of local people. The consultations have been vacuous. What we've seen, and actually I would challenge Margot to tell us what the statutory basis of these STPs is, because actually they're not a body that is established. They have no specific title except for they are a footprint. They are called, the STPs are called a footprint. That means they are accountable to nobody through the democratic
We'll put that
process.
to Margot Jones, but just to be clear, as you say, efficiency savings, the government calls them, you are calling them cuts to those services.
Well, they are.
And you would halt them.
What we're saying is we want to make those savings. Of course we want to...
You said they were cuts, but you want to make those
We want
cuts.
to make any savings that we can, which are genuine efficiency savings.
All right, well,
but what is driving this programme is the money, not the health need. And it's local people that must be involved in determining that health need and how it's then catered for.
Right, well, let's go through that point by point. There are plans in these health plans that have been put forward to downgrade services, aren't there, including A&E departments and maternity services?
No, these plans are all about putting services on a more sustainable and safer footing. And I want to just take issue with what John Ashworth was saying.
Hang on, but just before that, because we need to be fair to our viewers here, you say there are no plans in any of these papers that have been put forward at a local level to downgrade any services or close any hospital units.
Well, there might be plans to involve the closure of certain units in order to put the overall service in an area on a more sustainable footing. In the Black Country, where I represent, we've had some improvements to patient care and hospital safety by consolidating certain services in one particular hospital or another. And if I might add, Joe, there's an awful lot of services that are currently delivered in hospitals which would be far better for patients if they were delivered in the community.
And do they have public support?
And there's been a consultation.
What
These
form did the
plans,
consultation
if I
take?
could just finish what I'm saying, these plans are not Tory plans, as you heard in that film. They are plans that have been developed within the NHS. They have the blessing of independent health think tanks like the King's Fund. The independent medical director of the NHS is right behind them. This is not something that should be party political, and it's certainly not something that the Conservative Party has set up. These are NHS plans to make the service more sustainable over the long term.
And isn't the point, Barry Gardiner, that nobody wants to see services closed or shut or downgraded in their local areas, but that there are perfectly sensible plans to actually move services around so that, yes, you may have to travel a little bit further, but you cannot have every single small medical NHS unit offering every single treatment to people across the country?
In my own area in northwest London, we have, and as a Labour government, we did precisely that. We saw the point of centralising trauma. We put that in one hospital, trauma care, in Northwick Park Hospital, and it's worked very well.
And isn't that what these STP plans are doing?
And the public supported it. Here, what you have is this is being driven by unaccountable bodies, and in fact in northwest London you have Hammersmith and Fulham refusing even to participate in the STP.
I thought doctors, local medical staff were on these STPs.
The hospital, Hammersmith and Fulham, and the whole of the Ealing local authority is saying they will not participate in the STP because it isn't taking account of local need and local wishes.
All right, well,
we want to democratise the process.
Let's just talk about the money, because the NHS, as you know, is a very big issue. It always is in election campaigns. And Labour have proposed a series of, for many people, would be very popular proposals. They want a pay increase for NHS staff. They want to put into law the mandatory minimum number of staff per patient and funding training for health professionals. Would you back those proposals?
You have to see them in the wider context,
But
Joe.
I'm just asking
let
those
me just say that over the last 7 years, the NHS total budget, total spend has increased year on year, and that increase will be continuing.
What's it been per patient? What's it been per patient budget? Because actually that hasn't increased, has it? In fact, numbers released by ministers show NHS England will face a sharp reduction of 0.6% in real terms per head, per patient in the financial year 2018-2019. So I take your point that overall it may have gone up, but not per head. You accept that?
Certainly. If you're saying that it is a 0.06% drop in 2018, I think I heard you right. I think that we haven't seen the manifesto yet. That's the one proviso I would make. And secondly, I would say that is, even on a per-patient basis, at least a static situation. But the overall money being spent on the NHS is increasing.
But there are more patients and patient demand. Can I just come back to the issue? The proposals that have been put forward by Labour, and I'll come to how they'll cost them in just a moment, but the pay increase for staff who've been on a pay freeze for quite a long period of time, putting into law this mandatory minimum number of staff, do you support that?
Well, for a start, that's not correct, if I may say.
Which is not correct?
The fact that there's been a pay freeze for all staff, that's not the case. A lot of staff in the NHS, a huge number of staff in the NHS, have had their progression pay on average a 3% increase. It's not fair to say that
you wouldn't want to see a substantial increase, which is what Labour's...
Well, I want to see an affordable increase. And if you look at Labour's plans, as the advert that you put up that the Conservative Party is introducing today, they are totally uncosted and unaffordable and leave a huge black hole.
Well, how much will it cost, Barry Gardiner? How much will those things that I've just listed, about a substantial, you used the word substantial pay increase for staff, putting into law the mandatory minimum number of staff per patient and funding training, how much does that cost?
Let me tell you, the nurses' bursaries will come out of the... we have costed them against the tax cuts that the Conservatives have given to the wealthiest in our economy.
So you're talking about corporation tax?
What we're doing is, in the manifesto, every single one of the commitments that we have made will be in detail costed figures, pounds, I nearly said shillings.
But you've already costed these. I mean, you've already said it's going to come. I mean, I'll help you here. But you've already said it's going to come from the cuts, increasing, corporation tax.
The nurses' bursaries will come from corporation tax. The carers' allowance will come from inheritance tax. The 10,000 more police officers will come from capital gains tax. The educational maintenance allowance will come from corporation tax. The student grants, again, from corporation tax. But let me make this point.
So what will the corporation tax rate be?
Well, Andrew, you will know that the corporation tax, actually the highest it was ever, was in, I think, 1982.
No, I just asked you,
under
what
the
will it be?
Conservatives at 52%. That will be in our manifesto, exactly what the tax rate will be. But what the Conservatives have done is they've taken it down from an average of over 30% now to 19%, and they're looking to take it down to 17% by 21,
So you put it back to 28%?
Now, well, we will say what we're going to do in the manifesto. My point to you is this, that it has all been contained within those clear envelopes. But
okay,
we're going to have to stop there, Barry Gardiner.
We have to move on. Because voters are going to the polls tomorrow in England, Scotland and Wales for the local elections. There's plenty to get excited about. All the councils in Scotland and Wales are up for grabs, as are 34 councils in England. And as if that wasn't enough, there are 8 mayoral elections in England. Now, psephological geeks like Barry and Margot here, well, they can barely wait for the results, but they'll have to, because first here's Joko with all the details.
Local elections take place tomorrow in England, Scotland and Wales. In England, there are elections for 34 councils with 2,370 seats up for contention. The majority are county councils, which are usually areas of strength for the Conservatives. Large cities where Labour usually fare better are not within this electoral cycle. There are also 8 mayoral elections in England, with voters in Greater Manchester, Liverpool and Sheffield among those going to the polls. In Scotland, every seat in all 32 councils have local elections, many of them affected by boundary changes. Since these seats were last contested, Labour has lost all but one of its Scottish MPs. Meanwhile, every seat in each of Wales's 22 councils is up for election too. All but one was last elected in 2012, in what was a very strong year for Labour, though independent candidates currently hold a quarter of council seats. In England, the Conservatives are predicted to increase their seat tally by 115 seats. That's according to the latest calculations by Professors Colin Rawlings and Michael Thrasher of Plymouth University. whilst Labour could be down by 75 council seats. As for the other parties, the Lib Dems are predicted to gain an extra 85 seats, while UKIP could be starting a freefall. They're predicted to lose 105 seats. Although the proportional system makes big changes less likely in Scotland, the SNP is predicted to increase both the number of seats they hold and the number of councils they control. In Wales, Labour are predicted to lose 130 seats, even more than their projected losses in England. That's based on analysis of a recent Cardiff University poll, which predicted a notable swing to the Conservatives in Wales.
Let's talk a bit more about the local elections. People will vote tomorrow, though most of the results, the vast majority, won't come through until Friday morning. No real overnight service of results for these elections. We're joined, will be in a moment, from Glasgow by the SNP's John Nicholson. Let me come to Barry Gardiner first. I guess the headline you will most fear on Friday morning is Labour wipeout in Wales.
Look, I'm going to wait until the voters have cast their votes, obviously.
But it doesn't look good, does it?
Look, I think one of the important things that you stressed in the introduction there was that on the cycle, these are seats which are not in the metropolitan areas where Labour is traditionally strong. And therefore, one would expect, given that we did relatively well at the last time these particular seats were up for grabs, that we would see a decline in our numbers.
But you've done traditionally well in Wales.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And it now looks like you won't be doing so well. And not just that you're not doing well, even more remarkable is it's the Conservatives in Wales who are the insurgents. That must surprise you.
Well, I think there's lots of surprises in politics after breakfast.
That's quite a big one, though.
Yes, Brexit has changed a great deal of the way in which the country thinks about politics. And I think what we're seeing is people may not be looking at these simply as local elections. I think it is important when you're electing local councillors who are going to be dealing with the basics of your own local town or city, whether it's housing, whether it's rubbish collection, whether it's the local education authority, whether it's social care. These are things that you really do need good local councillors for. They do a fantastic job. Well, and I think people should focus their attention on what these elections are about, rather than trying to play into the national picture.
So in Wales, if they focus their attention on what the administration run by Labour for 20 years has done, let's take education, for example. Maybe this is why you're not doing so well. Why is it that Wales is behind England, Northern Ireland and Scotland in every single area measured by the OECD PISA rankings on reading, science and mathematics? Wales is behind every other part of the UK, but education has been devolved and your party has run it for 20 years.
Well, look, as you say, the Labour Party has been in control in Wales for a long period of time. But there are other services where actually Wales is outperforming. So I don't think it's
Which ones are these?
Well, actually, in certain measures on the health service, even though the Conservatives very often like to pick off the health service.
There's a lot of bad comparisons as well, though, isn't there?
There are, but that's why I'm saying it's very, you can't just pick and choose the bad ones. Of course, any government, compared with any other, will always have areas where it does less well than
well, education, of course, is pretty fundamental. It was your party that said education, education, education. You seem to be busting. I've got a question for you, but what is it you want to say?
Well, I just want to say that I totally disagree with Barry about the NHS in Wales. Labour have spent less on the NHS in Wales, and I urge people to consider their promises for the rest of the UK in light of that fact.
So why are the cancer outcomes better?
Outcomes are worse across the whole body of health, and waiting lists are longer. Waiting times are longer, so I think it's not just education where the Labour-run government is failing their citizens, it's also in health. And it's no wonder that the Conservatives are making inroads in Wales.
When we're talking about waiting times, Margot, there are 1.8 million people now waiting longer than 4 hours in England for waiting times. When Labour left office, that was 350,000. I think the government is on very shaky ground if it starts talking about the problems in waiting.
Well, Margaret James, I want to go to John Nicholson, who we now have in Glasgow. Before I do, Gary Porter, he's a Conservative peer. He's chair of the Local Government Association. He said there was a almost £6 billion gap in council funding and that services would have to be cut. That's one of your own Conservative peers saying that.
Well, people say a lot of things. We'll wait and see.
What's wrong with
the
what he
manifesto
said?
Is. Certainly,
$6 billion.
We have had to get greater efficiency in local government spending. Local government account for a huge proportion of the national budget, and in order to reduce the budget deficit, it would have been impossible to have made the progress we've made without reducing spending at a local level. But the point about Conservative-run councils is that they do deliver more efficient services in a more sustainable way, and there's a lot of proof of that.
John Nicholson joining us from Glasgow. Sorry, we had a few problems getting you in, but now we do. You're pledging today to put an extra 120 million into Scottish schools. Is that because you regret cutting 4,000 teachers since you came to power?
Well, you know that the First Minister has said that education is her top priority, and she said that she's passionate about it and wants that to be one of the key areas in which the Scottish Government is judged.
So far, not so good then. Because you've tumbled down the PISA rankings as well in Scotland in the past 10 years. And you cut teachers by 4,000. And on class sizes, you promised primary school class sizes of 18. They're now 23.5.
It depends where you are in Scotland.
Well, that's the average.
In my own area of East Bartonshire, for instance, we have very good schooling, and I go to schools all the time, and they're very impressive. So, I accept that there are areas of the country where clearly the schools have to be better, and we know that. We have a long and honourable tradition in Scotland about caring about education. But I think, to be fair, we have to remember that there have been huge cuts from UK central government to the Scottish budget, and inevitably that filters down.
Yes, but in the most recent settlement from the Barnett formula, there was a rise of 1.5% in real terms of the block grant that went to Scotland. But when it came to passing money on to the local councils, overall you cut by 2.6% in real terms. So you took these decisions within an overall envelope. That was your choice in Scotland.
Andrew, as you know, there's been an overall cut, and nobody doubts this. I don't think anybody argues about the figures of $3 billion since the coalition left office and the Conservative government came in on its own. That is a huge amount. But, there's a danger everybody relies on political cliches, that there are difficult spending decisions to be made and so on. Clearly, local authorities have got to manage their finances effectively and efficiently. I think one of the reasons that the Labour Party is likely to be defeated in Glasgow tomorrow after so many decades in power is because there's a lot of poor management locally, and everybody knows that.
Barry Gardiner, you're going to lose Glasgow as well as Wales?
I trust not. The point I would make about
most commentators in Scotland think you are.
Well, let's hope not. The point I would wish to make about the debt and the way in which the Tories have managed the economy is simply this: that when we left office in 2010, just after the global financial crisis, the national debt was £979 billion. Today, the debt with this Conservative government is £1.731 trillion. It's gone up by £750 billion. So
it would have gone up under any government.
No. Let's be absolutely clear.
Alistair Darling had a plan, a four-year plan, which would result in a massive increase
They said
in debt.
they were going to cut the deficit, and that was the way they were going to manage the debt down.
They never said they would cut the debt.
They said they would reduce the debt. They were going to manage the debt down, not increase it by 750 billion. And what they did, in fact, was in terms of the deficit, they didn't manage to reduce the deficit to zero by 2015 as they promised. They then said they would do it by 2020.
Okay.
They failed.
We're talking
to do
about
that.
Local government, though, not national debt. Local government's not responsible for national debt.
This is what then impacts upon local government.
Right.
Because the government is then taking decisions that shunt the responsibility onto local authorities.
That was the reason for my question to Margot James.
Refuse to pay them the money.
So let me just finish by coming back to Margot James. The budget announced an extra $2 billion for social care. Mm-hmm. How's that going to be paid for?
Well, the $2 billion That is what was announced, and
That bit I know.
think there's an agreement that it's needed in social care.
But how's it
And
going to be paid for?
I can't tell you exactly how it is going to be paid
Why
for, because I'm not the Chancellor. But if you know,
But it's government policy.
basically,
now.
we are reducing the deficit. We have reduced the deficit.
No, I'm not asking about the
and-
deficit. I'm asking a simple question
so-
of, you've announced $2 billion. It was to pay for by national insurance. You've had to resolve from these NI increases. So how will it now be paid for?
I'm not going to answer a question to which I do not know the answer. I don't know
Okay, if
the
you don't know,
answer
that's
for
fine.
exactly the $2 billion that we are proposing to use to fund social care. But you can see in the bigger picture, Andrew, that we are managing the economy by reducing the deficit. We've delayed the target date at which we will balance the books from 2020.
Okay.
That was announced already. So I think we are on a path to secure public finances.
Very well. We'll have to stop there. John Nicholson, thanks for joining us from Glasgow. Sorry we had some problems at the beginning. It's good to see you.
And you.
Joko?
Now, Labour made impressive gains in the Welsh local elections 5 years ago, including winning a majority on Cardiff Council. But they're facing a tough battle to retain control in the Welsh capital, as Jenny Kumar reports.
Thousands of years ago, the Romans ruled over Wales. They built a fort here on the site of Cardiff Castle to defend the realm. Now it's Labour who are the dominant force in Welsh politics. And 5 years ago, they took control of the City Council from the Lib Dems. The question is, can they hold on to power?
So we've got two excellent candidates standing.
Since their victory here, the Labour Party has seen infighting, resignations and by-election defeats. So will this affect their support?
We are fighting for every single vote. We know that this is going to be a very difficult election across the country, and we're going to make sure that we get on every single doorstep over the next few days up until that election to make sure that we have that conversation about what we've achieved here in Cardiff and what we want to achieve going forward.
The Liberal Democrats feel the timing of the so-called Brexit general election helps their local campaign, as Cardiff voted to remain. They recently won this ward from Labour in a by-election, and their aim is to take back control of the council.
We've been winning more by-elections across the UK than any other party, and also we are the fastest growing party now in the UK. I think just the last week or so we've hit 100,000 members.
The Conservatives are the third largest party on Cardiff Council. The Prime Minister's recent visit to South Wales has left them feeling buoyant.
I think there's a sort of feeling there's a complacency in the Labour Party in Wales, that they're going to return members and MPs on a regular basis. People are getting fed up with that. I think they'd like to see a change, and we represent that.
Plaid Cymru recently took a ward from Labour in a by-election, and they're hoping to make more gains.
But what we have in Wales is a one-party state, and people want change, and that's why you look around here, you see these signs, you see the buzz on the streets, people are choosing Plaid Cymru.
Cheers, everybody! UKIP claimed they were a big part of the political landscape in Wales after they won 7 seats on the Welsh Assembly last year. They currently don't have any seats on Cardiff Council, but they're fielding a small number of candidates to try to break through in this pro-EU city. So that's where the parties stand. But how much do the candidates know about the services the council provides? For example, what's the charge for disposing of 6 large household waste items? So do you know the exact cost if it's 6 bulky items?
Off the top of my head, no, no, I don't know.
We want to reopen recycling centres and not charge for bulky waste items.
So do you know the answer?
With the Plaid Cymru Council, that'll be free.
We would abolish that charge for collecting bulky waste items.
How much would it cost you to dispose of them?
£30.
Close, it's actually £37.50.
Oh, I'd accept that.
So varying degrees of knowledge there. But one thing all candidates are aware of is that the results from this week's local elections could provide clues on how the general election will turn out.
Jenny Kumar in Cardiff. And there is a full list of the candidates in the Welsh local elections on the Wales section of the BBC website, bbc.co.uk/Wales. Well, joining me now To discuss the elections there is Eluned Parrott from the Welsh Liberal Democrats and Rhun ap Iorwerth from Plaid Cymru. Welcome to both of you. Rhun ap Iorwerth, first of all, Plaid Cymru are targeting Labour areas. Labour claimed victory in the 2012 Cardiff Council elections. What evidence is there that the public mood has changed significantly since then in favour of you?
I think there's very clear evidence, and not just in Cardiff, but the length and breadth of Wales. Plaid Cymru has, of course, traditionally been very strong in local government in Wales, and we are confident that we will be making gains this time round.
But what was the evidence? But what's the evidence? That's what I'm asking in Cardiff.
Well, the evidence, as you would know from following many elections, is what you're hearing on the doorstep, the length and breadth of the country, that people are sick and tired of Labour. People, I understand why they have been perhaps loyal to Labour Party, which may run in their blood and has done in their families for generations. But they see now that we have an impotent and incompetent Labour Party, and the other side of this pincer movement that is threatening Wales at the moment is a vicious Conservative Party with its threats to public services. So we have Plaid Cymru in the middle of that, preparing to defend Wales, because this is a key time in our national development. We need to make sure we look after our communities.
Eluned Parrott, what are your chances realistically in these elections? I mean, you lost control of the council to Labour in 2012. You only have one Assembly member in the whole of Wales and only have one Welsh MP. You're starting from quite a low point, aren't you?
We are starting a very strong fight back, though. We have doubled our membership in my local party in Cardiff in the Vale of Glamorgan over the last year, and we are seeing real progress when we're going to have conversations on the doorsteps. We are the second largest party on Cardiff Council, and we are the only party other than Labour to have a full slate of candidates. So we believe that we can do very well.
Right, but both Plaid and yourselves are pushing an anti-Brexit message. That's clear nationally too. I mean, do you accept if you rely too much on a Remain message, you may appeal to voters in Cardiff, certainly, but not across the rest of Wales, and in fact you'll end up splitting each other's votes?
I think we have to be very careful. In terms of local elections, it is a balance between national ideals and things that we believe in that people want to talk to us about, and those very local messages. Here in Cardiff, what we see in the Labour Party is a microcosm of what we see at a national level. People see a Labour group that is split and fighting each other. They're too busy fighting each other to fight for the city, and I think that that plays very poorly to voters everywhere.
But how central is the Brexit message, or the anti-Brexit message, I should say, when you're out campaigning?
It's the most important thing people talk to us about. It is the first thing that people mention.
In Cardiff or outside of Cardiff too? Because, of course, across Wales, Leave was more dominant than Remain. I accept that in Cardiff it was different.
I've primarily been canvassing in Cardiff and the Vale, so I can't tell you those doorstep conversations, but I know that my colleagues across Wales, where they're out campaigning, they're reporting the same things back to the Welsh Party.
All right.
But Brexit is really, really important, but actually for local elections we must focus on the local issues, getting services right for the people, making sure that people have the local services that they deserve.
I mean, Rhun ap Iorwerth, do you worry that you are going to cancel each other out with such a similar message when it comes to the issue of Brexit?
To be honest with you, and every respect to Eluned Parrott, I believe that the Liberal Democrats are largely sidelined in this election in Wales, and evidence would show you that on the ground in Wales.
But not on Cardiff Council, not in the Cardiff Council elections.
But you talk about Brexit. Of course, I didn't want us to be leaving the European Union, but what we have now in Plaid Cymru standing up for defending Wales is pointing out to people that we have a bad Brexit, a bad Theresa May Brexit that is being brewed by the Conservative Party at Westminster, whilst we have to seek the best possible departure from the European Union for Wales, which is a net exporter to the European Union. Hundreds of thousands of jobs dependent on that. Holyhead Port in my constituency of Ynys Môn, dependent on a free border between Wales and Ireland. If we can show people, as I believe we are, that we will look after the Welsh national interest, defending Wales at every possible juncture, then I think people will trust us to fight and negotiate the best deal for Wales.
But there hasn't been evidence of that so far, because as I say, across Wales, Leave was dominant and more successful.
You're absolutely right. It was 50-50 exactly, more or less, in my constituency. A few hundred votes the wrong way, unfortunately. But what we want people now is to realise that in voting leave, they didn't vote to take leave of their senses. What we need is to make sure that Welsh interests are protected and defended. Plaid Cymru will do that.
Right. I mean, Eleanor, would you be prepared, or both of you be prepared, to work together to form an administration again, as you did in 2008?
I think we need to wait and see what the electorate return.
Of course, but I'm
it
saying
is very,
if
very
it does
difficult
return
to
that,
predict.
would you work together?
It is possible in local areas that we will work with other parties, but at this point in time, we need to focus on the elections. We are fighting a campaign with looking at local services, making promises to put right things like the bomb site that is our bus station in the city centre, to make sure that people have the services that they expect from their local council. We understand that Plaid Cymru will be frustrated that this general election has been called at the same time as a local election, because in fairness to Plaid Cymru, they get squeezed very badly in UK-wide elections. They're not seen as being as relevant in a general election as they might be in a local or an assembly context. But the truth is that parties who are willing to make things work ought to be able to talk to one another.
All right. And do you agree with that, Rune, in terms of working together in an administration?
Listen, I'm confident that Plaid Cymru can get the best ever election result in our history. I'd remind you that the Liberal Democrats, currently their sole member in the Assembly, is in government with Labour, this failed Labour government that has been running health and education in Wales since 1999. People are starting, I think, to see through that. And what we need is Plaid Cymru having as much influence as possible to defend our nation.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
So it's a busy day here in Westminster, indeed right across the country. Fortunately, Ellie's on hand with her election desk of news. Ellie.
Well, Andrew, no desk here today, but I have got other people's gazebos, and it can mean only one thing, a big set piece here in Westminster. And this afternoon, Theresa May is off to see the Queen for all the formal stuff, but as of 1 minute past midnight last night, Parliament was dissolved and there are no more MPs, just candidates. It means the election campaign is officially underway, and here are some of the things that have been happening. The Lib Dems have been out in Oxfordshire, driving fear into the hearts of young voters.
For the local economy, it will be a disaster.
They're feeling cheery after announcing party membership is at a record high of nearly 102,000. But this man isn't one of them.
But don't tell people who voted Leave that they didn't know what they were voting for. Oh, come on, Tim.
The Greens opted for a long-term strategy of winning over tomorrow's voters today.
I'm going to try and pitch it to everyone. It's going to be quite a challenge for me as a politician, but I'm going to try.
The co-leader Jonathan Bartley went back to school to make the case for emergency intervention into air pollution.
Good morning.
UKIP said international aid should be cut to 0.2% of national income rather than 0.7%, and the BBC licence fee should be phased out over 3 years. At one point yesterday, it looked like the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon was about to steal someone's phone right in front of everyone. She didn't. Later today, she's doing some local election campaigning in Tory Glen, which is a real place in Glasgow where she hopes there won't be too many Conservatives. On the campaign trail yesterday, Theresa May got a little peckish and committed one of the cardinal sins in electioneering, eating in front of the cameras.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
This morning, Ed Miliband, who himself had an unfortunate incident with a bacon sandwich in his last campaign, tweeted the Prime Minister, "We should talk." His conciliatory tone may have something to do with it being the anniversary of the Ed Stone, his manifesto monolith unveiled 2 years ago today, that set in stone his party's election pledges and universal ridicule. But over it now, he showed yesterday just how dedicated he is to his constituents by mowing the lawn.
Multi-talented. So, as we've been saying, Parliament has been dissolved. But what does that mean? Well, we're joined now by the Clerk of the House of Commons and their main constitutional advisor, David Natzler. Welcome to the Daily Politics. So, what does it mean, dissolution?
Well, it means that Parliament no longer exists as an institution. It dissolved at 1 minute past midnight this morning. I stayed up to see it go. But, of course, it still exists as a building. And it still exists as an employer, so our 2,300 employees in the House of Commons are not putting their feet up, we're still hard at work.
So it doesn't mean a holiday for everybody, it doesn't mean everybody can take a break?
No, I'm afraid it doesn't. They may be able to take a break if they can take annual leave at some time or another, but in fact the building itself is, if anything, more open than usual. So we've opened up days we wouldn't normally be open to the public because the houses would be sitting for public access, and in particular for younger people. So we've got an offer on. If any of your viewers are watching, anyone aged 18 to 24, which doesn't apply to anyone in the studio here.
You can confidently say that, yes.
I can say that, can visit for free if they can come and book.
Oh, great. So this is the time to go if you're hesitant to come and visit Parliament.
And they will be harassed by us to register if they haven't registered, and on
So
the big
you're doing
day
a public
to vote.
service here in that sense.
I hope so.
Right. I mean, it was dissolved, as you say, at a minute past midnight. Is that unusual?
No.
Right.
It's just happens to be the beginning of the day on which it dissolves. So there's a lot of funny interpretation goes on about all these rules, as members, as former members of Parliament will know exactly when it is that their passes get disabled, meaning they can't get in, how long they have to clear their offices, and that applies to their hard-pressed staff, all of whom, I assume, certainly like us, were taken by surprise.
Yes, I think you can, again, confidently say most people were taken aback by the snap election. Do MPs, now they're not MPs, they're candidates, are they across the rules? Do they know what happens? Do they behave accordingly in terms of not overstepping the mark as they would when they're MPs, using facilities, computers?
They never overstep the mark when they're MPs. Actually, I wouldn't allow it. There are rules which are broadly the same as they were in 2015.
Right.
So it's only 2 years since the last dissolution.
Yes.
It does come around regularly, like Saturdays. This is the 10th dissolution that I've experienced, so it's not a sort of an amazing event. But the rules are quite complex, and we have changed them in one important respect this year in response to requests from members and others, which is that members will still, and their staff, or their former staff, will have access to our network. That's to say, and to emails, but they must only use it for sort of hangover parliamentary activities and not for political or campaigning purposes. They can also, as last time, they pay us a higher charge if they want to carry on using the equipment that we lend them. That's the hardware, which they can use for electoral purposes, but they are paying a charge to us, which also is the same as 2 years ago.
Right.
So it is not I who can oversee what they do, or is anybody else. They must oversee themselves, but ultimately, of course, in this democratic system, there's no shortage of people who are keeping an eye on what they do in a sometimes critical spirit.
I can imagine. The House of Lords is not elected. Could they not continue working and sitting?
Well, not once Parliament is dissolved. The monarch summons Parliament, and then by statute, in this case, Parliament is dissolved. So they're not two separate institutions. They are part of the same, the Commons, the Lords and the monarch together. But again, peers are slightly different. They're different in many ways. Different in many ways. Obviously, they don't have to go out and campaign to get re-elected.
No.
But Parliament, that's what I mean, as an institution, it's not just the House of Commons, is effectively ended. It's like term is ended at school, and that's it.
Yes, so school's out for you two, in one sense, and you're out on the campaign trail. Have you got work to finish in Parliament before you stop?
We have been really trying to finish up all the casework that we had outstanding from our surgeries before dissolution. I think there's a couple of ones that we're really trying to squeeze this morning, and I think I'm going to have to ask David for
what, an
questions.
extension?
No, I know I won't get that. But just how I can actually do that. Is it as Barry Gardiner, even though not as an MP?
Yes, as you know, you're now Barry Gardiner, not an MP, and your emails going out will say that with an obligatory text at the bottom, and also your social media, the same as in 2015.
Yes. I changed that last night at 11:30.
Right, and briefly, all over for you?
Almost, although the odd thing is that we are still ministers until a new government is formed. But it's important we don't obviously engage in work or make announcements that might affect the elections, so it's all very careful. No, I shall be full-time campaigning for a good result in the West Midlands mayoral election tomorrow for Andy Street, and for the Prime Minister to be re-elected.
Thank you.
What a surprise.
David Natzler, thank you.
Let's return now to the local elections, which take place tomorrow. I'm joined now by Peter Reeve from UKIP, he's in Cambridge, and Jonathan Bartley from the Green Party. He's on College Green. Welcome to you both. Peter Reeve, looks like this is going to be a car crash for UKIP tomorrow, doesn't it?
No, not at all. We in UKIP stand by the way our councillors have worked. We're very proud of everything they've done, and it is going to be a tough election for UKIP. Remember, in 2013, the equivalent election where all these seats were up last time was our best election result ever. UKIP still has 500 councillors, 147 of those are being elected this time, so no matter what the results, and I think our results will be fine, but no matter what, we will still have at least 350 councillors, so UKIP in local government goes on strong.
Really? Define fine for me. Plymouth University's calculations, based on actual by-election results, suggest that you're going to lose over 100 seats. Is that fine?
Well, one of the great things about UKIP is whether or not we hold seats in Parliament or elsewhere, we influence and we lead the national debate. We do that locally very often, but also in terms of national politics, UKIP has led the way for several years now. We've led the national agenda. I hope many of our councillors get returned. I expect them to, because they are some of the hardest working people in politics in the country. You know, many of our councillors are cleaning public toilets, cleaning up the streets, gritting the roads. They do the practical job, and one of the big comments that we've had is one of the big differences between UKIP and other parties is not only do our councillors work harder, but because we have no whip, they genuinely represent their constituents, and they're not told how to vote by their parties like the other parties are.
No, indeed, you have a long record of defections and revolts and so on. That's,
we're very proud of our independence.
I'm not going to argue with you. Jonathan Bartley, you're contesting more council seats than you've done in the past, but what would a good result look like? There's no sign of any kind of green insurgency cutting through, is there?
Well, there's slow and steady build. You're right, we're building 524, I think it is, more candidates than we did in 2013. We're hoping to make gains in the North East, in the West Midlands, which wouldn't be necessary strong territory for us normally. In the Isle of Wight, we've taken seats recently in by-elections off UKIP, off Labour, and we're looking to build steadily on that. You know, the more people see of the Greens, the more they like the Greens, and we don't want to suddenly, you know, peak and then implode like UKIP are doing. We want to build steadily so we can then make a bid for more parliamentary seats.
Well, you say the more people see of the Greens, the more they like them, but of course your party was in charge of Brighton Council, where you introduced gender-neutral council forms and toilets and meat-free Mondays in the staff canteen.
How scandalous. Yeah.
But you then had a real problem actually getting the rubbish collected, which would seem to be quite a fundamental issue for a party that calls itself Green.
Well, the issue there, of course, was Labour and the Conservatives getting together to impose an austerity budget. We weren't in overall control. We were a minority administration in Brighton. So we did manage to get a lot done. Introducing the living wage, much more affordable housing, a 20 mile per hour speed limit, which cut road casualties in 5 months by 19%, collisions by 20%. Really stuff that changes people's lives, the bread and butter of local politics, and that's what local elections tend to be determined by, whether you can deliver on the ground. And certainly, you know, when we're not in control and Labour and Conservatives will impose austerity, there's nothing you can do. That's the electoral maths, unfortunately.
And Peter Reeve, what about your record in local government? You won control of Thanet District Council in Kent in 2015. Seen as a major breakthrough. You then lost control because your councillors kept resigning and defecting.
Well, we are still in control of Thanet Council, and we're very proud of what they've done there. When you look at
well, you lost full control.
When you look at their output, that council went from, when it was run by Conservative and then Labour, it was described by the LGA as toxic. UKIP have turned that round, and the last LGA report into that council praised Chris Wells, our leader, and our leadership team, and said UKIP have this council in good hands. Even today, we are now talking about reopening Manston Airport. That's something that Labour and the Conservatives gave up on, and we're going to build houses all over. We're going to reopen that airport.
We're going to have to leave there. I thank you both. That's it for today. The 1 o'clock news is starting over now on BBC One. I'll be here tomorrow with another Daily Politics Election special. Hope you can join me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.